Paul Mbiya has announced his commitment to join the University of Kansas. So that's a big commitment for KU. It checks off a huge box in terms of a need. We'll talk about everything that he brings to the team. But I kind of want to backtrack here, Kevin, first with the timeline of Paul Mbiya.
Yeah.
Because he's a name that we've been talking about for the better part of almost 2 months at this point. He was a guy that Kansas was interested in all the way back in late April and into early May. They actually officially offered him on May 1st. He was a guy that he's from the Congo originally, been played in France, played in the EuroLeague as well a little bit. He is 20 years old. He actually just turned 20 in April. And he was a guy that the KU was on pretty early in the transfer portal process, international recruiting process. He ends up committing to NC State in early May. He committed to NC State back on May 4th. After KU offered him, NC State offered him. He commits to NC State. Obviously, I think it's well documented if you paid attention this offseason, sort of the I don't want to call it a rivalry, but the back and forth between KU and NC State with Darian Williams ending up going to NC State after KU pushed pretty heavily for him. NC State is a program that they got Will Wade as their new head coach, which injected a lot of energy and enthusiasm into their program. It's obvious that they had a lot of financial backing as well. And so Embaya ends up committing to NC State. And okay, I guess that's the end of that, right? He signs with NC State. Well, NC State has been continuing to do some additional recruiting and looking for players to add to their roster. And I think that may have contributed a little bit to ultimately Paul Mbiya's decision to decommit and reopen his commitment a little bit. That happened. He decommitted officially from NC State on June 18th, so exactly 1 week ago. KU, obviously being previously interested, as I just discussed, decided to hop back in and start re-recruiting Embaya again. And he is a player that I know from a measurement standpoint, Kevin, he really jumps out, and that gets you really excited, I'm sure. But what else do you think he brings to KU now having officially committed to come play in Lawrence?
Well, first, I want to tell you a kind of a funny story about Mark Twain. Mark Twain was a guy that a rumor kind of got out that he was really, really sick, and a newspaper reporter reached out to him and basically said, hey, I hear basically you're on your deathbed. And Twain writes back and says, I've heard those rumors too. I've even heard some rumors basically that I'm dead. And I'm writing this to tell you that's not the case. And he ends it with, the report of my death was an exaggeration. And of course, that has grown over the years to the rumors of my demise were greatly exaggerated, all the different ways that people want to put that. But the reports of Kansas's death was an exaggeration, Nick. And I think, with how freaked out sort of everybody got when you got Embaya going to NC State, when you got Darian Williams going to NC State, when you've got this player or that player going there, when you're losing foreign players to Duke, and you're just like, my gosh, how is Kansas going to fill out this roster? All of a sudden, you kind of have your guard group set with Rosario. And Paul Mbiya, I think the reason Kansas wanted him really early on, to your point, is he's a terrific fit. I mean, when you look at, this is a guy that has NBA ability, NBA athleticism, has NBA length, certainly. I think that's kind of what you were alluding to. The reports of his wingspan are kind of, some people say it's 7'6", some people say it's 7'8". It kind of jumps around. Either way, this is a guy that can pretty much tie his shoes without bending over. And he's a really high level shot blocker. He's a guy that dunks a lot of stuff. He does have some rawness to him, but there's a little bit to be intrigued by there. And honestly, Nick, I think he's a better free throw shooter as well than Egi Demir. And so there is a little bit of skill there that you could potentially tap into and continue to develop. And one of the things that we talked about sort of from the very start when we were talking about, hey, what do you want with Fleury's backup, is basically you wanted somebody that you weren't going to lose a ton when Fleury went off the court, whether that guy supplied energy, defense, shot blocking would be great, and potentially even somebody that could be an NBA guy himself, or somebody that could stick around for a couple years and be somebody that could be an NBA guy, a year or two from now. Those are all boxes that Embaya checks. When you look at the length, the athleticism, the shot blocking, the defense, this is a guy that when Flory goes out, Kansas is still going to be really, really good defensively, and teams are still going to really struggle getting things at the rim. He's also, physically pretty well put together, and when you add all of that, I think the game is going to be a little bit fast for him, even with playing in EuroLeague the way that he does. There's going to be an adjustment period. But Nick, you've seen Baylor have kind of these raw international centers who have come in, and for 10 minutes you almost forget that they're out there, and then in the next 10 minutes the guy blocks 3 shots, grabs 5 big rebounds, gets 3 fast break dunks, and you're like, my God, that guy just changed the game. I think Embaya has a lot of that, and I think he fits further into this team's identity, which is this is going to be a team that's going to be kind of grindy on you, that's going to be defensive in nature. And you look at what Bill Self likes, a team that has a point guard that can score and create for others, a team that, is going to be probably a pretty elite defensive team. This team is really starting to fit what you would think of it in terms of a Bill Self team.
Yeah, and with Embaya, I think we talked about it a little bit even back in early May when we were first kind of doing some preliminary scouting on him when KU was interested. One of the things about him is a lot of it is projection at this point. He didn't get to play a lot in Euro, so it's another one of those players where if you were to just look at the box scores, you would say, okay, well, what's up with this guy? Like, he played 3 minutes a game, played 4 minutes. A lot of these types of players, it can often be projection. But you mentioned it. He measured in at the Adidas Euro Camp at the end of May at 6'11". He's got incredible wingspan that you highlighted as well. So he certainly checks all the boxes athletically. And this is a player that truthfully is already on some NBA draft radars heading into 2026. So he's already somebody that I think has been highlighted by some NBA scouts as, hey, this guy has all the athletic tools and then some. It's just a matter of him demonstrating a little bit more on the court, and he's going to have that chance, I think, certainly with KU. So a very, very exciting pickup, I think, because now you have Flory Badunga. You knew you had, along with him, with Trey White, and you had Bryson Tiller, but that was the last glaring need after the commitment of Cole Rosario, who we talked about yesterday, which if you want to hear more about Cole Rosario and what he could add, I would encourage you to check out our previous show breaking him down. But with Embaya, absolutely. Now you've got the square peg and the square hole in this last spot, or one of these last spots on Kansas' roster, and I think that's very significant. We talked a lot about Egi Demir as well out of Turkey. This, I think, feels like it was going to be an either-or situation for Kansas, so you could probably write off Demir, I would say, at this point. He's a guy that had a little bit more experience at the professional level in Turkey, but I think we kind of mentioned, like with Embaya, that the ceiling feels much, much higher in terms of NBA potential, in terms of what he could do at Kansas as well. And I want to add this as well. Let's say we expect Flory Badunga to do what we think he can do, which is take a big step forward in a sophomore season and play like a potential first-round level NBA caliber player, right? Let's say that happens. Well, in that event, certainly you would say, okay, Flory Badunga is going to be no longer on Kansas's roster going into 2026. He will be in that scenario, more than likely headed to the NBA draft. Well, in that scenario, let's say Paul Mbiya is able to play 12 minutes a game at Kansas and really start to build a little bit and learn the system a little bit more and become more comfortable over the course of the season. Maybe he makes some flash plays, but he's working his way up. Well, now you're talking about a guy that in 2026 becomes your Flory Badunga in the sense of, oh, he's a guy that flashed a lot in his first year on the team, and now he would become your primary center. And you're talking about basically a pipeline of you would just rinse and repeat and say, okay, you played, 12, 15 minutes per game in your first year on campus. You showed some flashes. Then in your second season, it's all yours. You got the job, and you can go out and perform at the level that you want and then go on presumably to the NBA draft, I think would be the expectation at that point. So I think that's probably like the ideal scenario for both Kansas and for Paul Mbiya is you come in this season to KU, you work with Flory Badunga, you work behind Flory Badunga, you provide some really strong defensive depth off the bench at that 5 spot. You showcase a little bit of your skills playing, 12 minutes a game, whatever it may be, behind Flory Badunga. Badunga has a great season, goes on to the NBA draft, you can take his place and then do the same thing in 2026. So I think that would be the most like perfect scenario really for Kansas. And then if you want to get into the high school recruiting weeds, you have a guy like Ethan Taylor, who's a 2026 7-footer in the Kansas City area that KU's recruiting. Yeah. And so, yeah, you start to think about, okay, you really are able to sort of create this pipeline of really big, athletic, tall centers that are really bouncy type players over the next basically 3 to 4 years at that point, which would be very, very exciting for Kansas because, I don't know if Bill Self is specifically thinking this, but it's easy from the outside to look at it and say, hey, you had Hunter Dickinson, who was a really, really great college player, who was, just a different style of five, right? Sort of that not necessarily showcasing so much explosiveness, athleticism, and so on and so forth, even though he was an excellent scorer and a polished offensive player and a really strong rebounder. Well, now you're setting yourself up to have a completely different archetype of five-man, which is the more Floyd be doing good Paul Mbiya type, which is incredibly athletic, incredibly dynamic, very long arms, really explosive, can jump out of the gym, all those things, excellent shot blocker. Like that's what you're heading towards now with Kansas. And I wonder if that was in the back of the minds of the Kansas coaching staff, after having to use Hunter Dickinson, saying, hey, Hunter Dickinson was a great player, but maybe he didn't do the things that we want to do to be successful all the time, especially on defense. Well, now all of a sudden you knew you had Flory and you were able to convince him to stay, I guess, really is the big thing. Now you add in Paul Mbiya, who is another player of that same type. And you're looking at talking about basically for 40 minutes of every game that KU's going to play this season, they are going to have a legitimate shot blocker on the floor at all times, essentially, with this Paul Mbiya addition. That's the way that I'm looking at it.